Hey, what's up, YouTube? Hope y'all are having a great night so far. Today, we're going to be going over a concept in Gods Unchained called tempo. This concept isn't specific to Gods Unchained, really. It's a concept you can apply to almost every game in general. But yeah, I think it's really important to apply to Gods Unchained because it'll help you understand what cards are good and what cards aren't good, and from a player's perspective, it'll help you learn how to become a better player and manage your tactics in game. From an investor's perspective, it'll help you learn how to discern which cards are good and which cards are not good, right? So part of the reason why I started this channel in the first place is because I want to help players get better. I believe Gods Unchained is a really good game, and it has potential to be one of the best play-to-earn games out there. And in order for us to grow our player base, we kind of have to help everyone out in terms of helping new players get better at the game, even helping intermediate players get better. And if you're an investor watching this as well, it'll help you make better decisions in investing cards because you understand how the game works. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So what is tempo? Tempo is a measurement of time in strategy games used to evaluate how close a player is to their win condition. So there are a lot of definitions about tempo. I chose this specific one because it's the most general out of all of them. Chess has a different version of tempo. TCGs will usually have a different version of tempo, but I kind of wanted to give this definition because it encompasses everything that the essence of tempo in games. So in chess, your win condition is to capture the king by moving your pieces and positioning them to occupy space, right? Your opponent is trying to do the same thing. So forcing them to react to your moves and waste their time / their turn will net you tempo. In TCGs, the same concept kind of applies. So instead of capturing the king, your win condition is to reduce your opponent's health to 0 by developing your board usually. And your opponent is also trying to do the same thing. They're also trying to reduce your life to 0 by playing minions or playing spells, yada yada yada. So like in chess, forcing your opponent to react to you and to waste their turn / their mana will allow you to control the tempo of the game. Other examples are fighting games. Tempo in fighting games is more so the player that controls the space or the level in the opponent, which player is cornered versus which player is controlling the center, or which player is controlling their area of space. And in Mario Kart, specifically, tempo is whoever is in first place, right? Racing games has the easiest definition of tempo because literally you can measure tempo by seeing who's in first, right? And then there are comeback mechanics in Mario Kart. You have red shells, green shells, bananas. Then you have driving mechanics like drifting, or those little boost arrows on the floor that help you go faster. Those are all ways to shift tempo in racing games. But we're not talking about racing games. We're talking about Gods Unchained. So tempo in Gods Unchained is one of the most important things to understand in the game, in my opinion. In Gods Unchained, you get tempo by spending mana to play cards, developing your board, and disrupting your opponent's board in return via removal or combat. So each turn a player takes, they're trying to execute these actions and compete to dictate the tempo of the game. Tempo advantage will usually convert to damage. So if you're winning, you will usually be able to use the extra tempo that you have to either attack face or use that extra creature to, just hit your opponent essentially, or use the remaining mana to do some damage, right? And usually the player that dictates the tempo will usually win the game. The relationship between tempo and mana in Gods Unchained, I tried to simplify this as much as possible, but tempo is a measurement of time, right? And in Gods Unchained, time equals turns, which in turn equals the amount of mana you have available. Right? So from there, let's just stop there. In Gods Unchained, the first 5 turns of your game are going to equal 1 mana increase, right? So turn 1, you get 1 mana. Turn 2, you get 2 mana. Turn 3, you get 3 mana. Turn 4, you get 4 mana. So on and so forth. After that is a little different, and we'll go after that later on. But when you think of tempo, you want to equate it to mana. And then from there, you want to equate that mana to the cards you use / the god power that you use, and the health, damage, or more resources that those cards provide. So those cards will either A, advance you to your win condition of reducing your opponent's life to 0 by providing health, providing a source of damage, and then providing more cards to help you achieve your goal. Therefore, the more stats or effects a card can provide for its mana costs, the more efficient that card will be in providing tempo. Like what I said, so for what I said before that, regarding the mana system in Gods Unchained, anything after 6 mana or anything after 5 mana will require those cards to equate to the number of turns worth of stats, respectively. So what I mean by that is the mana system in Gods Unchained, turn 1 mana, turn 2 2 mana, turn 3 3 mana, all the way up to 5. After you get past 5, you need additional amount of turns to unlock that next mana crystal. So to get 6 mana, you need to wait 2 turns. To wait 7 mana, you need to wait 2 turns as well. 8 mana, 3 turns. 9 mana, 4 turns. So in a sense, the cards that you play need to be equal to the amount of turns you had to wait to play the card statistically. And that's why if you see the Market Watch videos that I do, I will give a ton of the 7 mana, 6 mana, 8 mana, 9 mana cards a hard time, or I'll grade them harder because 1, they're a lot harder to play. You have to wait for a longer period of time. And 2, they have to equate to that amount of turns that you've waited for them. Because when you compare it to a card that you had to wait 1 turn for, like a Marshwalker, for example, which is a 1/4 with regen, it's totally different to equate it to like a 7 mana card. So yeah, that's why I grade the cards the way I grade. And one more thing about tempo is card combos can amplify the value a card can provide. So off the top of my head, the best combo probably in the game right now is Siren of the Grave, Sulfuric Rain. That card by itself, Siren of the Grave, is pretty mediocre in my opinion. The reason why it's mediocre is 1, it's a 1 mana 2/2, so it's average stat line. You get to play it. You have to obliterate a card in your hand, so it nets you negative card advantage. And then from there, it's an afterlife effect. So you don't get the effect right away, and your opponent has the ability to answer or react to that afterlife, unless you have a way to proc it. And that's why Sulfuric Rain makes it so much better, because now Sulfuric Rain will proc the Siren of the Grave's effect if you combo it with it. And then from there, you proc the effect, Siren of the Grave dies, you proc the afterlife, all your opponent's minions go to sleep, you draw a card because of Sulfuric Rain's effect, because it destroyed Siren of the Grave, and now your opponent's minions are forced to eat 2 damage this turn. That's a really potent 1 card or 2 card combo. That's essentially 2 mana. So card combos can definitely amplify the value a card can provide. When evaluating cards, you do have to consider if those combos can be available, right? Of course, it's a drawback, or there's a drawback to it. One is because it's a combo, you need to have those cards at that exact moment, and sometimes that doesn't happen in a draw-based game like Gods Unchained. But if you can find a way to consistently get that, it's a pretty good stuff. Cool. Now we're going to go over some concepts, tempo concepts that don't necessarily specifically relate to Gods Unchained. I mean, they do relate to Gods Unchained, but this is more of this applies to like every turn-based game, essentially. So first up, we have first mover advantage. First player to move in turn-based strategy games will always have a slight tempo advantage. You see this in chess. In chess, the player playing the white pieces will always have a half tempo ahead of the player playing the black pieces until the black player can force a tempo swing via moves like a fork or a pin or a forced check or anything like that. In Gods Unchained, the game designers tried to counteract this by providing bag of tricks to the players, right? So turn one, for example, the player playing going first will always have one bag of tricks, but that's why the player playing second will have three bag of tricks. So the player playing second has essentially 2 to 3 opportunities to regain tempo, depending on when that first player wants to play their bag of tricks. In Hearthstone, you could see them trying to implement that penalty as well, or I guess remake that penalty. What's the word for it? They're essentially trying to recover that penalty by providing the second player with a coin. Same concept happens with Gods Unchained. Another thing you have to note about tempo in Gods Unchained is in Gods Unchained and Hearthstone, there's this thing called attacker's advantage, which basically means attackers have the advantage because of the combat system. And the combat system in Gods Unchained, the attacking player can freely choose where their attacks go. Unlike games like Magic or Legends of Runeterra, where an attacking player chooses their minions to attack, but the defending player has an opportunity to defend or choose which minions to defend with. That doesn't exist in Gods Unchained. In Gods Unchained, the attacking player can just go face if they want to, trade if they want to, not attack if they want to. And this in turn amplifies the tempo advantage that an attacking player can have, right? And this is also part of the reason why most games in Gods Unchained last 9 to like 12 turns, because of this specific combat system. Cool. Moving on, I just want to go over how different deck types approach tempo. I think this is important to understand as well. One thing I do want to note, though, is this is a general rule of thumb. Some deck types will approach tempo differently depending on the matchup. For example, aggro decks usually want to assert tempo as early as possible and convert tempo advantages into damage. But against another aggro deck, depending on the player that goes first, an aggro deck could also try to play to control board and control early on. So play like a control deck, pretty much. That's more of an advanced concept to think about, but I just wanted to throw that out there because if you are trying to get better as a player, you do have to kind of think of how matchups affect tempo as well. But in general, aggro decks want to assert tempo as early as possible and eventually convert their tempo damage into face damage. Control decks want to control the game early on by neutralizing their opponent's threats and eventually create a tempo swing with their powerful late game cards. Combo and OTK decks, sorry, English is hard, want to create a massive tempo swing with their powerful combos. This is usually like Patron Warrior. If you played a Patron Warrior deck in Hearthstone, that turn 5 Patron Warrior into a Death Rattle effect that deals damage to that patron, resummons another patron, can be a powerful combo and tempo swing. Ramp decks usually give up the early game to play their ramp cards in exchange to gain access to more powerful cards earlier. So typically in a Magic ramp deck, you'd want to play your Sip of Elixir into either an equivalent exchange or a Mana Toad. From there, you will get to that important 5 mana threshold and play cards like Guild Enforcer, or maybe even if you play like the 6 mana card, it's a 6 mana 8/4 or 4/8 with Taunt. that one, you typically want to just play powerful cards than your opponent and then gain the tempo back that way. And then mid-range decks are interesting because they can approach tempo more flexibly, I think. This is where the matchup knowledge comes in, because if you're playing a mid-range deck against a control deck, you'd want to be the aggressor because your opponent has the inevitability that they'll be playing bigger cards than you, right? So you'd want to end the game as soon as possible. But versus an aggro deck, however, if you're playing a mid-range deck, it's reversed, right? You want to control the tempo of the aggro player. You want to neutralize their threats because you have that inevitability that you're playing bigger cards than them, right? So mid-range decks are interesting in the fact that they can approach tempo differently depending on the matchup. But honestly, it's pretty much the same thing with every other deck. Like aggro versus aggro is tempo applies differently. Control versus control, the tempo for control decks is applied differently as well. But yeah, for the most part, in general, this is how usually decks of these types would like to approach tempo. So now that we've gone over the decks and how they would want to approach tempo, I want to talk about something that you're probably going to encounter in most games in Gods Unchained, and this is the tempo swing, right? So what is a tempo swing? A tempo swing is when a player gains tempo control over their opponent. This can be done in forms of like a board wipe, or maybe trading a minion, or maybe even playing a superior minion that your opponent can't deal with, like a polyhymnia or something. Tempo swings are super important in the game, and being able to create tempo swings will definitely help you win games more. Also, understanding where your tempo swings are will aid you in building a deck as well. So, for example, ramp decks are a perfect example of trying to know when your tempo swings are, right? Because in a ramp deck, you're playing your sip of elixir, you're trying to ramp up to 5. Your tempo swing is when you can play those big minions, or maybe when you can play that big spell that can wipe your opponent's board, right? In board wipe death, a similar thing happens. You're usually behind on tempo in board wipe death until you play that Apocalypse Now or that Demogorgon, or even that End Times. End Times is a great example of a tempo swing because it clears your opponent's board while at the same time provides you a threat on board so that you can threaten your opponent. Cards like that are going to be important to like realize, or cards that do those kinds of effects are going to be important to understanding the deck building process in terms of like what you're trying to do and how you're trying to approach tempo. Polyhymnia is also a good example of this. If you're playing an aggro deck, you want the tempo, right? Or you want to control the tempo right away, so you'll be playing 1-drop minions, anything you can play a minion on first turn. If you're going second, you want to play blitz minions. That's why Frenzy Aggro Roar is a good deck, because of the amount of blitz minions that it has, it can force tempo swings like right away, and that's important, especially in a deck that wants to control the pace of the game. But going over the rest of the slide, yeah, some ways to force tempo swings. Putting more stats on the board than your opponent can deal with, like slapping down that Polyhymnia or slapping down that Hellion Elite, having them deal with that source of damage because it's a big threat is important. Another way is clearing your opponent's board, then playing a creature in the same turn. End Times, perfect example of that card, of that phenomenon. And then threatening lethal, right? Because if you threaten lethal, your opponent has to react to your board no matter what. Because if they don't, they basically lose the game. You can see this in aggro decks, for example. Aggro decks, usually the turns before lethal happens, they'll abandon the board and then just start going face. that's one way to force like the tempo. Also, burn decks are a great way for this because like if you're playing, I don't know, say a magic burn deck, right? You play double worm breath and you get your opponent to 6 health. You're forcing your opponent to either try to survive by forcing a heal or reacting to your play, trying to either play their Demogorgon if they don't have it, or maybe play their Just a Nibble. But yeah, essentially tempo swings, or to force a tempo swing, you want to create a situation where your opponent has to react to you. That's pretty much it. Cool. So that's pretty much it for the guide. It was a lot of talking for sure, but I hope it helped you understand as a viewer how tempo is important in Gods Unchained. And I hope that the next couple of games you play, you really understand what's going on within the game, right? If you go first and you're playing a Frenzied Aggro War deck, you play your Boil Blood Outlaw, or you play, you know, your 1-drop minion, maybe a Wild Boar or something. Like, you understand that you're trying to control the tempo for the whole game, right? Or even in the deck building process, when you make a new deck, like, when you choose your creatures and you choose like how you want your strategy to play, you want to have that tempo strategy in mind. Like, okay, well, am I more of a control deck? Am I going to play a little passively for the first couple of turns in hopes of surviving so that I can create these big tempo swings where I play my 7-mana 6/10 or my Polyhymnia? Or am I playing like a mid-range deck and I need to know where my tempo swings are? This will also help you in your mulligan, for example. Like, going second, knowing that you need to force a tempo swing will help you realize, okay, well, what cards force tempo swings, right? Maybe I need my Vanguard Axewoman so that I can play a minion, force it to trade, and then do something else, right? Or maybe I need to keep that Canopy Barrage so I can force a tempo swing later. All these things play in effect, and if you want to become a better player, I'm not saying you should try to aim for Mythic or anything like that, maybe Diamond or Gold or whatever, but if you want to become a better player and get better at the game and enjoy the game more, maybe reap more rewards from your play-to-earn stuff, it is important to understand this concept. Cool. I felt like I went on for a really long time. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope this helps someone out there. If it did, please like the video, share it somewhere, and subscribe to the channel. I want to do more content like this for sure. You know it's serious when I make a PowerPoint, so hope y'all enjoyed, and see you next time. Bye.